You remember in lecture 10, which I think you sort of liked, was called The World That Bagehot Knew. Okay, so think about this lecture as The World That Bagehot Knew, except now we're thinking about the international piece of that. Okay, and in fact, I'll start exactly where I started with The World That Bagehot Knew. You remember the story I told there was about firms buying and selling goods to each other using bills of exchange and then discounting them at banks and so forth. So let's start with exactly that, except now the firms will be in foreign countries. Okay, and they're still discounting them in London because this is the center of the world money market in 1873, but they are themselves living in other countries. So let's just start with that. We have a surplus firm or country, okay, and they're surplus in the sense that they're selling goods and receiving payments. And what they're receiving payment initially is a bill of exchange, which is a promise to pay in 90 days, a promise from the deficit firm or country. You can think of these as being in different countries, and neither one of them is in England. This is the important thing. And this one is acquiring the goods by issuing a bill of exchange here as a liability, a promise to pay. Okay, so that's how the thing all gets started, and you're familiar with this. The problem is that this bill is not money, and the firm that has sold the goods wants to convert it into money, and that's where we bring in the City of London, the City of London banks. Okay, so the City of London is this area of London where the international banking has taken place for hundreds of years. So these are private banks. I'm going to bring in the Bank of England, the central bank, later on. These are private banks, and they are in the discounting business. Okay, so even if you're not in England, okay, you can take this bill to a bank in England and discount it. And what does that give you? The bank is accepting a bill and paying out notes. Okay. Okay. So the surplus firm winds up getting paid, even though the deficit firm has not actually paid yet. That's the point here. That the surplus firm now has banknotes. These are sterling notes. We could do this with bank deposits as well, but I think the intuition is going to be sharper if we think about these as pound notes, okay, from the City of London banks. So far, so good. Now, eventually, when the whole idea of this, as you'll remember, is that when this bill, which is due in 90 days, when this comes due, the idea is that this deficit firm will pay that bill it will have acquired some sort of money because it will be selling these goods and so forth. And so it will be paying that off by paying off notes. Okay. And those notes go back to this bank here, plus notes minus bill. Okay, so that there's this, you swap a bill, you send the notes out, and then the notes come back in again, okay, for credit. So there's this outflow here, and inflow here 90 days later. Okay. And you remember we talked about these banks as managing very carefully their inflow and outflow of notes. You know that this is their liquidity position, right? They're concerned about this, and they try to create portfolios that are lined up in time so that they know that every day they're going to get some repayments, some bills are maturing, and that's their source of liquidity. This is classic 19th century bill of exchange banking here. Okay. So far, so good. This is sort of just review from lecture 10, except I've asserted that this surplus firm is not in the UK, and this deficit firm is not in the UK. And so now we have to think about what does that mean, or what is the consequence of that? The consequence of that is that these notes these are sterling notes, so they're not in domestic currency. This surplus firm that is getting paid in sterling notes, what good are they? Yes, it's true that these are sort of the international reserve. This is high-powered money for international banking, but you can't use them to pay your workers in this firm. Okay, and similarly, this firm here that is promising to pay these notes, it's not their own domestic currency. They're selling their goods for domestic currency. At some point, they're going to have to transfer that domestic currency into sterling notes in order to repay this bill. So there's a foreign exchange dimension on both this side and this side, which we haven't dealt with yet. Okay. So for this surplus firm, we need a foreign exchange dealer. So there's a surplus dealer, or we could call this also a bank. In this course, we think of banks as a special kind of dealer and dealer as a special kind of bank. And this surplus dealer, let's say, is in foreign exchange, is a foreign exchange dealer. And what does that mean? That means they stand ready to buy or sell to a market, okay, the domestic currency of this country here for the international currency, which is the pound sterling notes here. So what they're prepared to do is to acquire these sterling notes, okay, and pay out domestic currency. Okay. I'm not writing it up there. You can imagine what it's there for the surplus firm. Okay, that they're just on the opposite side of that. They're selling their notes to the dealer and receiving the domestic currency, and then they're spending it on whatever they want, hiring workers or paying profits to the firm owners or whatever. The point is that this is a dealer sort of function, right? You're moving from one kind of asset into another, and then possibly back again. This is a dealer function. And over here we have another one. Okay, the deficit dealer or bank. Okay. Here the problem is that, and this comes 90 days later, right, that the deficit firm is selling these goods for domestic currency and it needs to acquire the international currency in order to pay back. And so it is buying notes from the deficit dealer and paying domestic currency. Okay. That's where it gets the notes that it pays to the banks in order to repay the bills. All right. So we have two kinds of dealers here. Okay, and although I write domestic currency in each case, these are conceivably different domestic currencies because they're different currencies. They're different countries. But the one thing they have in common is that they're both exchanging with the international currency, with the pound sterling. Okay, now when we say pound sterling, what are we talking about? This is 1873. We're talking about pieces of paper, okay, that are the liabilities of the issue department of the Bank of England, okay, which holds gold and promises to keep them at par with gold. Okay, so there's the Bank of England here as well. And both this bank and this bank, okay, use these Bank of England notes, okay, as their international reserves. Okay. And the Bank of England holds gold against those notes. So these banks may well be cashing those notes in for gold, or vice versa, okay, during this period. So there's another market-making activity that's going on here that we need to have in mind, which is that there could be plus or minus gold on this side of the Bank of England, okay, and plus or minus notes on this side. The notes are liabilities of the issue department of the Bank of England, and if this surplus dealer here decides it wants gold, it can just cash them in. It can take those notes and swap them for gold and the Bank of England makes a two-way market in those notes. Okay, so these are three different kinds of dealers that we have here, and you can see there's a hierarchical structure, right? This is the top of the system. Right. The Bank of England the gold is the real international currency. The Bank of England is issuing these notes, which are promises to pay gold, and then everyone else is issuing currency that they keep at par with those Bank of England notes. Maybe they use gold too, okay, interchangeably, but it's more convenient to use notes, and also deposit accounts and things like that. I'm again using notes just for the intuition. Our intuition about banknotes is often stronger than it is about deposits. Okay, so it's just the same as I was talking about, in lecture 10 about using this sort of credit expansion in order to facilitate trade, except now it's a little more complicated because this trade is international trade, and you have three different currencies being involved here. This is what actually happened. This is the way it happens today, by the way. You remember in 2 lectures ago, I was saying how almost all world trade is invoiced in dollars. Okay, but not all of world trade is somebody buying or selling something to the United States. These are third-party countries that are doing business in the dollar. It's the same thing back here. It's just it was pound sterling, and we're showing how that worked.